In Houston, I'm John Herder. It's Tuesday, the 20th day in April. Great as always to have you along, everybody. In a nutshell, From the Experts is a compressed virtual networking accelerator helping people across industries connect very quickly in a brief, moderated, interactive show format. It's like a TED Talk with interactive discussion. So, what's in it for you? Our promise, if all goes well, your curiosity sparked, new ideas come to light, and you may have helped yourself and someone else solve a problem, make that connection, reach the opportunity faster. Networking has never been more important to your business. Folks, help me welcome guest experts Catherine Nabukalu and Dr. Reto Jerry, global charcoal energy experts. Well, Catherine's interested in supply chains, how products are valued, and how they're moving from point to point. She's a bright and rising star, a green biz 30 under 30. Her day job, project manager with DC Sustainable Energy Unit, helping DC businesses and residents use less energy and save money. Sounds pretty good, huh? Professor Reto grew up in the Swiss Alps, where he learned to treasure Mother Nature in a pristine setting. He's had a passion to apply fundamental science to the study of nature and build an environment in an effort to conserve our planet for future generations. Folks, be sure to take time, connect, and get to know these guys. They're excellent. So, Catherine, set the scene for us. Would you please?
Right. So, we're going to talk about charcoal, as John mentioned. We're going to talk about how it's produced, where it is in the world, and the future, starting today, of course, how it's been in the past 25 years and how it's going to impact the energy system in future and our public health. So this part is talking about, this part is generally about charcoal and coal. Usually there's a lot of confusion between what charcoal is and what coal is, mostly because they look very similar, and the words also almost make them seem like they're the same thing. So here's the first poll. John is going to send out the first poll just to see if our audience can distinguish the two energy alternatives.
Okay, keep going, folks. Move those fingers.
Right.
All right, let's see here. This is what we got.
Right. So, oh, that's amazing. So I see 100% of the people say charcoal is not the same thing as coal, and that is correct. But the thing is, there's some confusion about where it comes from and what it's used to make it. So as you can see, the two different things here, we see charcoal as the on one side as the lightweight material, and you see coal is more dense. So let's move into how charcoal is produced. You'll see that most of charcoal starts with cutting trees. It's very rudimentary process, very manual, and then those trees are set together in a batch, and most of it is covered, and then they're covered with soil, and the producer sets the mound alight. Most of this happens in Africa. This production is common in sub-Saharan Africa. So next, they do that in Brazil. In some cases, they put those logs in a mound. In Brazil, where they set that alight in a stationary kiln, which is made of clay, and it's a very lightweight material. So it invites overloading on trucks because it's packed in very long sacks and very, very lightweight materials. So when that gets into the marketplace, you'll find that charcoal is very similar to other commodities on the market. So it's very different, even though it's an energy source. It's trading very differently than electricity. And the purpose of this charcoal is mostly home use. People use it for leisure. If you look at Europe and most parts of North America, it's used for leisure. It's used for home cooking in most of sub-Saharan Africa as a necessity. So let's move on to the next slide, Rito. we'll talk about other uses of charcoal. In most of the world, it's getting used for industrial purposes. As you look at the price of coal is increasing in terms of the price of carbon is increasing. And at the moment, coal is used in the industrial process of steelmaking. So there is growing interest in using charcoal to replace coal in some of the industrial process. And if we've got the responses, John, let's talk about between personal use and commercial uses. I want us to talk about the quantities of coal, of charcoal on the market.
All right. So thank you, Catherine. You see in the poll, we were asking you how many bags of charcoal are produced. Right. And the majority of you said 600 million bags. In fact, it's 6 billion. All right. Wow. So that's an astounding number. 6 billion bags of 20-pound charcoal. That's really an amazing number. And so we want to talk a little bit about the production, the annual average production. And one of the things to remember is that the majority of this charcoal is produced in Africa. As you see over here, about 25% on average is coming from Africa. Global production today is about 54 million tons, and that's where we get the 6 billion tons of charcoal bags. Now, Africa as being the main producer, what is interesting, that the top producer in terms of a country is actually not in Africa, it's in Brazil. And what is also interesting about Brazil, it is not one of the top exporters. And what you see here in the top 10, there are mostly countries that have tropical forests where this is sourced, but not all of them. If you think, for example, of Egypt, that's a semi-arid country. There are other important producers such as Somalia, for example, or Ethiopia. They don't have the vast forest resources to use. Nevertheless, they are major producers. Now, some of these countries also export a lot of their production. For example, Indonesia is being the largest producer, exported globally. Yes. Now, typically charcoal is viewed as the energy of the poor. Well, the data shows actually something completely different. Most of the charcoal is actually going to rich countries, which have a well-developed energy system and also are energy secure countries. So the question, of course, is why is that? So the charcoal is produced in relatively undeveloped countries. The majority of that is exported to very rich countries. And that's a dichotomy that we will have to address in the future. So we want to talk about the future of charcoal from that perspective. There are 2 points that we want to bring into this discussion. First of all, the sustainability aspect. And instead of using wood from freshly felled trees, we should start thinking more of using other materials, secondary raw materials, for example, waste streams. Agricultural waste is one example. And the second point that is rarely discussed is that charcoal combustion and production actually is associated with severe health impacts. And this is not addressed, and we have to address that because especially charcoal is used in such large amounts in less developed countries such as India or sub-Saharan Africa. So we want to spend the last moments of our discussion here to talk about innovations that are necessary to make charcoal more sustainable, and then also the sourcing of the materials, the raw materials. So let's get this discussion going. And what I would like to ask the audience now is, what can you do? What can we do to make this material more sustainable? Because we have to do something, right? We cannot leave it as such. We cannot produce such enormous quantities without addressing fundamental issues such as sustainability. What can you do as a consumer? What should we do? And if you have a company that works in this space, what can you do in terms of innovation?
Right. And to add to Rita's point, it's not just about the resources and where the charcoal is coming from. So it's not only the west side. So charcoal quality is so important. And as we mentioned earlier, it's produced in very rudimentary settings. It's produced outside, and there's no control of quality. And as you saw in the last slide, the gentleman burns biomass, and there's so much smoke coming into his face, and that is a lot of pollution, and also bad for his health as he breathes in the particulate matter. So what can we do to control the quality of charcoal so that it's healthier for people that use it?
Anybody on the floor? Some examples?
One of the questions that we also have for you is, why should we not develop a kind of a label for sustainably sourced charcoal, like we have labels for organic materials or for palm oil? You know, in many countries, palm oil is not welcome anymore because of the huge damage it does to tropical forests. And some countries refuse to import palm oil that is not sustainably sourced. So could we make a label for that as well?
I've got a quick question, comment. I mean, admittedly, a lot of my interest in charcoal use has come from weekend barbecue world, but I have seen a small company here that is producing charcoal out of the, I guess it's coconut husks that have been discarded from other industries. I'm not sure if it makes a difference on the polluting end, but at least it seems more environmental in that it's coming from discarded husks that would otherwise be thrown away.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Brian. This is a very important point, and that's you know, what I meant with agricultural waste. There are so many waste products that are not used at all or poorly used, and this would be one way of using it. There are other ways. For example, you can burn it and use the ash for cement production or things like that. So we have to become creative with these waste materials. And I'm glad that you saw this company.
Right. And to add to that, Reto, I think I would like to add that the current trend of the charcoal supply chain is very informal, and there is no standardization as you know, regarding how it's trading around the world. Most of the times it's trading as a wood product in some countries, and in others it's just trading as charcoal, wood charcoal, or charcoal from nut shells. So the current statistics that you saw are wood charcoal. So this is mostly the one that's caused for, you know, produced from cutting trees. But in other countries, it's trading as a wood product. It's not even recognized for energy security. It doesn't count, basically. So how can we formalize this supply chain to make sure that it's counting as an energy resource, and it's the statistics can show that and reflect that, especially in the industrialized countries, so that we can improve its supply chain all the way to the manufacturer.
Right. So I get it that it sounds like there are two ways. One, the label is a way that we can all understand where the charcoal is coming from and sort of demand from our people a little more transparency. But then one of our folks, Lawrence, he was asking, hey, what is the usage breakdown between personal and commercial? Right? Is it even clear enough? Can you tell that, guys, on what that is? That's a question for you experts. Do you know that how much is commercial versus how much is industrial in terms of the total production?
So because I mentioned the charcoal supply chain is mostly informal, these numbers that we even showed were actually estimates, because there's no real, you know, measurement along the supply chain. When you saw the gentleman cutting the tree in the beginning, he's not measuring the waste inputs, the production and the kiln. Those things don't get measured, at least not measured on a scale. So by the time they get to the market on the truck, as you saw, they're just really selling as commodities. But that's mostly in the developing countries or industrialized countries.
So one of the questions in terms of supply chain, Paul Torson's like, well, what kind of ships are the charcoal shipped on? How big are they? Must be extremely light cargo versus, you know, other things. Of course, he's in the shipping business. He wants to know.
All right. I'm very excited about supply chain, so I think I'll answer that. So it's not, charcoal is, if you look at some pictures from Somalia, these are ships that are going, you know, between Somalia and the Middle East. Obviously, they're trading between the Middle Eastern countries. They're shipped on actually rudimentary boats and not very big cargo ships as you saw. Especially that's for the international trade that is long distance. They're shipped just like any other commodity and labeled as wood products at the customs level. But we looked at the trade on Lake Victoria in Uganda, and it's just like any other commodity, just basic bots, because they're very lightweight and they can take a lot of cargo at a time.
And what about, we have some further input here. What about forestation? What's the impact on that? Are the areas being reforested, repurposed? I know you guys know quite a bit about what's happening there.
Right. Reto?
Yeah, maybe that depends on the countries and the laws that exist and the policies. In some countries that actually export charcoal, it is illegal to actually produce charcoal. So there's a very interesting market there that in some countries, it's certain districts where it's illegal to produce charcoal, but it's still legally traded in markets. So it's hard to track that, but definitely some of the countries have reforestation products, but others, for example, Somalia is a big disaster because that's a semi-arid nation and it's one of the main exporters. And so that's basically, it's exported because they need the money from the export. And there's no reforestation there, as far as we know.
Reforestation is going to be more possible in the future if we have controlled groups of people that are producing it and they can measure the inputs. But we haven't seen that on reforestation directly focused on withdrawals from charcoal production. We haven't seen that happening in sub-Saharan Africa, at least, because most of the land use there is private and people do whatever they want on their private land. As regards to Brazil, a lot of the production is illegal and it's just more cutting than planting.
So again, lack of transparency, difficult to make policy stick, but that doesn't mean that you don't stop and find better ways, but also as a consumer, right, to drive it from the other direction. So Peter Hill asks, hey, what's the overall percentage of global energy of charcoal, right? If you line that up with other sources of energy, or is that difficult to determine because of the informal nature of charcoal?
It's actually not tracked. We don't know. And it's hard because even where you have electricity available, such as, for example, in Kampala, electricity is widely available, but people prefer the use of charcoal, and that's not tracked. So it doesn't count in the overall energy mix. And that's why also we don't know much about the proportion of the global effect of using charcoal. From the industry also, it's quite substantial what is used in charcoal for some industries, for example, in Brazil, but also there are other, like in Europe, I think charcoal is quite important in industrial settings.
Right, yeah. And even that industrialized countries are not tracking their charcoal use because it's mostly overshadowed by other sources of energy, because most industrialized countries are using electricity when they say energy, they're talking about electricity most of the time. But charcoal is a source of energy that is not acknowledged in most of the energy mix.
You know, Tuyeni is coming back and he's saying he's concerned about the emphasis on the formality and control over the trade because control tends to marginalize the poor and take away a key livelihood for millions. And I know that's a balance. What's y'all's take on that?
Right. It's actually amazing because I did this fieldwork in Uganda, in Kampala, and we spoke to a lot of charcoal producers there. And the control here is not to withdraw the producers from the trade. It's about really making it formal and acknowledging the socioeconomic benefits of charcoal so that more people can not only acknowledge that charcoal is a source of energy, but also strategize for the future. In terms of how it's used in the market and how it's contributing. Because if you look at countries like Tanzania, if you look at Nigeria, this energy is not even acknowledged. And the strategy now is to ban it completely. But not knowing its advantages socioeconomically is causing policies to sideline the poor more than what acknowledging it would do.
Sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about the tech of it here. We were talking about other ways to get there. Biomass. Mary says many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are developing strategies for sustainable production of biomass, processing, efficient use, and then Kenya has got a strategy for that. We also know that we have Gilliam that's here with the firm that actually is making using different type of technology for briquette as well. Um, maybe we could have somebody talk about technologies that they're using. Gilliam, do you want to speak up for just a minute about your tech and why that's making a difference?
Yes, I would like to start by apologize for my accent, because I am French, and as you know, French people doesn't speak very well English. They prefer speak to love. You have a question. What can you do to improve the sustainability of charcoal? For me, to improve the sustainability development of charcoal, it's necessary to review the charcoal value chain from the beginning to the end. To start by sustainable reforestation, to use wood waste, like wood, bamboo, or other things, and to have a production with a carbon net negative technology, as we have. And after, to the end, Catherine spoke about traceability to certify the origin of charcoal. I think it's also very important. I saw an example in Ivory Coast. There is an NGO company who tried to make a new computer, a new program for the traceability. And you have also another topics with stoves to preserve wood, to preserve charcoal also.
What's the essence of your technology solution? What are you doing that's different?
It's not pyrolysis, it's carbonization, direct carbonization. It's a system who was improved in Argentina and in Chile also. And we consume 30% less of wood than pyrolysis, for example. And we made 8 cubic meters by kilns by day with very high quality charcoal. The quality of charcoal is the fixed carbon. When you have a fixed carbon with around 80%, it's a good charcoal. If you have a bad fixed carbon, you can have problems with colorectal cancer. This is a very dangerous thing. And after, with 90%, it's for industry. For example, in Brazil.
Gilliam, can I ask you a favor? Can you drop the link to your technology into the chat so people can look at that, and we can follow up on that a little later. I'd like to just take a minute to move from that question in the essence of time and going to the FTE expert ask and give. So Reto and Catherine, what is your ask of the audience today?
So maybe I can take that. So my primary concern is the sustainability of charcoal, how we can improve that. And in my opinion, it's very important we use waste materials instead of freshly felled trees, or else have reforestation as a program. That's one of my main concerns. The second one is health effects. And there, I think we need innovation on the consumer end. Obviously, for the producers, it's an issue. When you do this rudimentary technique, like Catherine has discussed in Uganda, that affects the producers. There's a few people per kiln, but on the consumer side, it affects millions of people. And especially if this charcoal is used in poorly ventilated rooms or verandas, it affects whoever is cooking. And in many parts of the world, it is still the women cooking, typically with some babies around or children around. So it affects disproportionately the health of women. And so I hope we can come up with a simple, cheap, stove that can help in reducing the emissions from charcoal, that the people who use it are not exposed so much.
Right. So if anybody knows anything around that kind of technology, if your ask is, who do we know that is engaged? Well, we have Kiln here. Does anybody else, right? You're asking for new tech that will help solve that problem or something like that? I think that's what you're asking. So
Yes.
then what about the give? What are you guys willing to give to the audience today?
Do you want to take that, Catherine?
Right. So most importantly, we want to give the insight that charcoal is still here, regardless of the bans that are happening in sub-Saharan Africa. It's important for us to understand that the demand is there, and demand is what is driving production. So it's important to look at charcoal as an energy source that is here to stay, and not beyond energy. Is also going to be more important for steel production. So banning it is not working, and it hasn't worked because of demand. So it would be important to either create a technology that's going to increase electricity consumption to the point that is cheaper than charcoal, but I haven't seen that happening in any African country. But right, and the second thing would be increasing for industrialized countries to acknowledge their charcoal consumption, because that would help us have more transparency and add it to the energy security.
Got it. So I, being the business guy, I'd summarize it saying, you guys are the experts. Anybody who wants to know more and get involved, call you. And the other thing that you just said that I heard, Catherine, was get involved in a simple way by requiring, as a consumer, to some sort of a label, like, where does my charcoal come from? Know your charcoal and ask your suppliers to tell you where it came from. And that's how, just like in the organic labels, over time, this process, we started understanding what was going on. So y'all contact Catherine and Reto. That was their give, is they're that resource. So glad to tell you today's show is brought to you by our underwriters. Porter Hedges, attorneys at law, the informed choice for complicated litigation in the energy business. Interpoint, protecting what you care about most, people, profits, brand, and the environment. Unique Ventures, the energy hybrid technology accelerator with a unique approach to venture capital. And Alliance Benefit Group, building retirement plans for your business that work. So let's keep going. I think this is flowing great. We've got more questions. I guess the second question on the list, and one we all want to know, is why should you, your business, and society even care, right? That's a good question. Anybody want to contribute to that?
Perhaps I can just say one thing. With many products, we really don't know where they come from. That's just one example, but one example that affects, a huge number of people producing charcoal. And so we are consuming it in some of the richer countries without knowing anything, or without even asking about it or being aware of it. And I think that's something we have to change. We need to know how it's produced. And, it supports many people in this supply chain. And we should know who these people are and how we can help them.
Right. And actually, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa as well, when charcoal gets to the final market, people don't really know who produced it. So the producer does not exchange information with the consumer, and the consumers don't exchange with the producer. So there's not really any information between the two on, hey, this is what I use to make it be safe as you use it. But also there's no space to pay for sustainability. So that would be a really interesting investment to see.
That's cool. We've got some interesting conversation going on here between technologists and commercial folks. Looks like Hillington Ziwa actually produces some kind of a stove unit. Gilham, you probably know of Ziwa. If not, good. Glad you could. And then Sylvia's asking, what's the efficiency of the kiln, right? And then we have a question also about, well, what about, thinking about in the production countries, will microgrid solar displace some of the need for local consumption of charcoal? We talked about, bringing grid power, but what about something different? He goes on to say, without a cost for the emissions, solar will be expensive unless subsidized. Maybe a tax on charcoal emission in Europe or other countries could help to support, clean up the in the origin countries. So I don't know what you guys have to say about that, Catherine or Reto.
Right. I'm actually glad that question was brought up. Because the common mindset is that if we have more electricity, somehow charcoal consumption will go away. But it hasn't happened for Europe. It hasn't happened for North America. They're still demanding charcoal. Well, it's overshadowed, but it doesn't mean it's less or it's not there. So electricity is not providing a direct substitute for what would be a utility for charcoal. A lot of people are still using it because it is because they just like the taste of food when it's made with charcoal. Like the barbecue, people are not turning to electricity. So, so our conclusion is that electricity and gas are not directly substituting for what customers want from charcoal.
That's cool. So Sylvia, thanks for posting about the charcoal project, and she's inviting people, entrepreneurs, and also venture capitalists, right? So we have those folks in the network here with us today. If you're interested in knowing more about how to get on that, whether it's from the tech entrepreneur or venture capital, go to the project, talk to Sylvia, talk to the others on the call. Paul is asking, is there any data on the decrease in charcoal use versus electricity rates, particularly in Africa? Kind of what we talked about, but he's asking about where you get the data. Where would you go and find that data?
So what we know so far is that, so I'll look at Kampala as the example because that's where most of the fieldwork was done. People have more electricity, at least if you compare that to the rest of the country. But even people with electricity access are purchasing charcoal stoves and using it, either because it's more reliable and the electricity is very erratic. So for simply the purpose of cooking, people will turn to charcoal. So increasing electricity cannot be, compared with declining charcoal use or any. So it's been hard to find any metrics that will guarantee a switch between the two fuels, especially just in the small realm of cooking. But most people will use the electricity if they have it, of course, to make some parts of life easier, for entertainment and for any other thing. But just in the area of cooking, people with electricity, and it doesn't matter what socioeconomic status they are in, they will just use that for cooking.
So Nate comes back and she says, all of Europe's charcoal annual consumption is equal to about a year's worth of Mexico's consumption. Is global trade really a big issue here?
Absolutely. Global trade is an issue because the supply chain is not known. What we know, even what the United Nations knows, is simply an estimate, for sure. And it cannot be an underestimation. Because the countries that are where we're getting this charcoal from are not having a compensation for trees in terms of that environment. So they're producing rudimentary, they're shipping to countries that already have their forests protected, and then they're not paying for sustainability of the fuel. So if you think about it, the exchange is only going between, the best exchange is between the trader and the consumer. So producers are not innovating to improve their supply chain, but also there's a huge environmental cost for places like Somalia, Egypt, Ethiopia, which already don't have forests, but then they keep shipping basically their trees to other industrialized countries to use for leisure. It's global trade is worth looking into.
Interesting. So please, Reto, go ahead.
The other issue I just wanted to bring up, we don't have really great data. There is a lot of data out there, but it's not great. And one of the reasons is in many countries where it's produced, it's actually sold by volume, by bags or volume. And in the international documents, it's typically listed as weight, because in the rich countries, like in Europe or the US, you buy it by the bag, but you buy it actually as a weight. It's traded as a weight. So this conversion doesn't work very well. And that's one of the reasons we don't have good data either. And the second point I wanted to make is that many African countries have big plans to expand electricity and connections to the grid in an effort to suppress biomass consumption. And that's, in a way, it's the opposite of, for example, Europe. They want to increase biomass as an energy source, often forgetting the health impacts that are resulting from that, or reacting instead of planning this. Now, Germany is a great example. It was promoted to use biomass on a personal level until the emissions from biomass combustion were bigger and larger than those from cars. So this is something that's very often forgotten.
So, like in most everything, if you want to succeed, find somebody else who's already doing it well. So find a model, right, that works. And I see that Beatrice has shared one of the models they're using in Kenya, which is this 2020 sustainable standards for charcoal and carbonized briquettes. So feel free to reach out to Beatrice because, I think that's the challenge. One, we don't have a global standard. We don't even have necessarily regional or local standards. So find one that works and try to leverage that and link up with those people. So we've got a question from David. He says, what does Germany use the charcoal for? And then, of course, Gilliam says, barbecue, of course. The Germans love their barbecue, just like Americans and a lot of people everywhere in the world. So with the thinking about time, we've got, 3, 4, or 5 minutes maybe. Let's shift to that last question, shall we? It says, what can you do as a consumer or a company leader to require more sustainably sourced charcoal from your store or supplier? Any ideas? I mean, how do you practically do that?
Right. I think for sub-Saharan Africa, what we know so far, because most people are using charcoal as on a daily basis for cooking, the first thing to do in terms of your own health is to cook outside. It's more aerated, there's better ventilation, but obviously, that means that there's charcoal demand. Therefore, the policy makers should be listening to that reality. Charcoal demand is still going to be here. So cook outside, it's more aerated because indoor pollution is very bad for your health. And the second thing is, really be curious about where this charcoal comes from. Know that even when you buy charcoal, you're not necessarily paying the producer, even though a lot of people say charcoal is produced by poor people. So, I might be paying the producer for some reason if I purchase it. There's no direct, if you look at most of the producers, they're not even getting paid to produce this charcoal, at least not directly, or it's not worth how much they're producing for. So I'll have her to add something to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Catherine. And also, if you have a chance to buy briquettes that perhaps it even says it's from recycled material, that would really help, and boycott the other ones. And we have some people on this call, Ziva, for example, he has a company that produces briquettes from waste. And this is the kind of innovation we need to support. Right. And in Germany, it doesn't say where the charcoal is coming from. And we know some of it comes from Nigeria, where it shouldn't be produced because it's illegal. And so, and Germany usually has these strict standards, but here nobody cares. So we as consumers can help by just buying the only products that tell you how it is made and where it's coming from. So we know where it's coming from, and helping local companies.
I guess that happens by people asking their store manager and starting that process. I mean, it sounds pretty grassroots and basic, but I think that's what a lot of us can do ourselves, huh?
Mm. And Paul has a good comment there about coffee. Same thing,
right? Right.
And palm oil we mentioned before. For many products, you want to know where they are coming from, and this is mass production. Think of the eggs you buy. Do you want it from a factory, or do you want it organically sourced? With free-range chicken. I mean,
Right.
I mean, many times you don't ask, and charcoal is one commodity that we don't ask. Where is it coming from? Nobody seems to care.
So last comment, Catherine Reto, before we close this thing off.
All right. I'll let Rita go first. Rita, do you want to go first?
All right. So we would love to be in touch with you if you have ideas how we can make this more sustainable. And then what I would also like to see is like innovation. If you're a technology company, how you can help in making this more sustainable, but also healthier for the millions and millions of people who cook their daily meals with charcoal. That would be great.
Thank you, guys. That's the last word. So question for you, the group here. How was the networking and the discussion today for you? The FTE post show notes will hit your email a little bit later today. So please take 30 seconds for the survey in order to get your copy of today's attendee contact list. You'll also find there the links to FTE videos and podcasts from previous shows. This one will show up later this week. FTE, we belong to you. It's your community and networking platform. Don't forget, follow up and connect the dots with each of the people here after the meeting. Oh, and by the way, if you know someone or you know someone and you're working on innovative next generation ideas, technologies, or business models and want to share your challenge with the network, be sure and let us know on the survey. We'd love to connect and learn more. If you had a good experience with us today, share it. Build this community with others that you want to network with. Forward a newsletter, invite your connection to our events. Folks, we're out of time. Be sure and join us for our next events, May 4th, how to speed up closing the sale in the wake of the global pandemic. Idar Voldnes, CEO of Interpoint, shares his dilemma through a current business case, sharing lessons learned, practical case study, and input from the group. May 18th, bringing employees back to the workplace as COVID-19 restrictions are lifting. Challenging, right? Attorney Laura Alanis, partner at Porter Hedges, shares the latest trends on this evolving back to office topic. Sign up right now, fte.network, invite your friends. Thanks once again to our experts, Catherine and Professor Reto, and all of you for making this the smartest 45 minutes of your day. Take care, everybody. See you next time.